Alright, hello everybody, this is niclas.huschenbeth and welcome to the third Patron game analysis live stream in which I analyze the games of my patrons. Alright, hello everybody, this is niclas.huschenbeth. Beginner's mistake, didn't mute the sound. In which I analyze the games of my supporters from Patreon. And actually somebody pointed out to me earlier in another video how Patron, I think it's called Patron. Patron? I always say Patron and it's wrong. I know that. Now I just have to figure out how to say it correctly. Patron. I think it's Patron. That sounds strange. Anyways, I have to get used to it. So this is the Patron game analysis live stream. I hope I get it right now. Maybe I should go to Google Dictionary or somewhere, Google Translate and check real quick how the word is pronounced correctly. But I'm gonna do it another time. And for now, just go with what I know. And some people are watching already. Bob Carlson and Elbordi Yunus. Hey guys, glad you're joining. And as always, before I begin with the analysis, I would like to thank the people supporting me in the King tier and the Queen tier on Patreon. And let me tell you who these people are. So there is, of course, Carol Lala. Thanks a lot, man. You are really helping me out. And then we have the Queen tier, Ian Lamb, Mario Guevara, Rodriguez. And we're going to see games of those two today. And then there's somebody who I don't actually know yet, unfortunately. Dusty, reach out to me. Send me a game so I can analyze it for you. But anyways, thanks for the support. And then we have Kevin. Kevin has been a supporter of mine for a long time, so I really appreciate it. I don't have a game of Kevin today, but maybe in the next stream we'll have two of them, we'll see. And then Park Song Bin. Also, thanks a lot to you if you're watching right now. And I think we're ready to see some games. And I have some good games today, so I'm looking forward to that. So let me switch over to the game view. And here we have it. And the first game today will be by Bruno. And Bruno Wilbert. He was playing against Agostinho Arruda. So Bruno, also thank you for your support. You weren't in the list right now because this is like a one-time thing, but that's also appreciated, of course. So thank you. So let's begin, shall we? Let's begin, my friends. I'm excited. I love these streams. So as you can probably tell. So let's start. Bruno with the white pieces is going d4. And here, just as an option, Bruno, you can go for the French, as you probably know, by playing e4. It's just another alternative. But okay, you can also stay in your familiar waters, I guess, play c4. And now g3, d5, and we have Catalan. Bishop b4 check, knight bd2, d takes c4. And now castle, and I looked at this briefly. I think a3 is a worthy alternative here. Okay, if the bishop retreats here, you can just take on c4. And if the bishop takes, then bishop takes, and you have gotten the bishop pair and a quite valuable dark squared bishop. Especially since those squares are already weakened. And yes, maybe black can cling on to the pawn, play b5, but I think you will definitely have some difficulties on the dark squares. So I think a3 is a worthy alternative at this point. Castle is of course very natural and I think also quite decent. But maybe a3 was a tick better even. c3 and here knight c4. I think knight c4 is good, but once again, maybe even better is to take and then play rook b1. The point is that the rook is covering the b4 square, not allowing the bishop to retreat. and this bishop feels a little bit uneasy sometimes, and black can't really take on d4. I mean, he could, but now not the bishop would feel uneasy, but the king on e8 not able to castle anymore because the bishop is covering the f8 square, and white has a beautiful lead in development, can maybe follow with something queen c2, knight c4, knight coming to d6 possibly, and black is really struggling here. So probably after rook b1, black has to do something else. But it seems difficult for black to keep this bishop. Let's say castle. You could, for example, go bishop a3 now, or go knight c4. And this bishop just seems out of place. And again, if black goes like bishop a5, you could take it, swap it off, or play bishop a3 first. Because I think in this position, if you get the dark squared bishop, it's worth a lot. It magnifies your compensation. So I believe that b takes c3 followed by rook b1 would have posed more problems to black, but even so, you have very nice compensation here. Now, Bruno, you play queen b3, and that's a natural move, developing the queen, but I think it would have been better to not attack the bishop, because the bishop on b4, it's vulnerable anyway. It has to move at some point anyway, so why provoke it to move? I would try to go for e4. Obviously right now it's not possible because the knight is covered in the square. So what you can do is play queen d3 or queen c2, preparing e4, preparing to gain space. And I think that would be the most natural way to proceed here. And then you can think where you put the rooks, d1, c1, b1. But to me, playing e4 makes the most sense here. e4, e5, gaining more space and restricting black's options. Because after queen b3, bishop e7, I'm not too sure how good that queen, how well that queen is placed on b3. Oh, and you're in the chat, Wilbert. Yeah, I should have recognized you actually. Wilbert Hoven, glad to see you. Kevin, I'm sorry. I see you said you sent me a game. Ooh, I must have missed it. I must have missed it. I'm sorry, Kevin. Okay. So sorry, Kevin. I have to do your game next time because I probably could pull it off now, but then I don't have it analyzed before, and I want to give you, well, full analysis and not like a quick look. So sorry. Okay, Wilbert. Oh, Bruno. Sorry. Bruno. Yeah, like you said, you played knight c4 very quickly, and that is common to just play the first move that looks good and comes to mind. It's very common, right? Knight c4 looks good. You don't want to take on c3, black wins another temple, but then you need to ask yourself what happens next. So taking your time is important, but of course to a degree, right? You don't want to spend too much time on obvious moves either. So back to his position, bishop e7. Now rook fd1, I think it's fine. Knight bd7, knight fe5, I like. Queen c7, but here your next move I did not like. It's not a bad move. It's just it goes against my understanding of chess, or I guess one of the rules of thumb I learned, and that is don't exchange pieces if you're having a space advantage. And here clearly you have a space advantage. You have more space. You're controlling everything up to the 5th rank. So you played knight takes c7, and by that you exchange a piece, and you also help black to develop his bishop, right? So don't help your opponent, okay? That's not necessary. So why is that rule? Why should you not exchange pieces if you have more material? Of course, it's a rule of thumb. But in most situations I see it apply. Well, it's very simple. If you have more space, that means your opponent has less space. And that means he has less space to maneuver for his pieces. And sometimes pieces, you know, your opponent would like to put two pieces on the same square as here. Put the bishop and the knight on d7, but obviously that's not possible in chess. So the pieces are kind of hindering each other. And if we're taking off material, then the piece can move more freely of the opponent, and that will make his job easier. So, with that being said, what could you play here? Well, just keep the tension, play rook c1. That's a very natural move to bring the last piece into a game, develop the last piece. Or play e4. That's another move, but I'm not sure if you have to play this yet. I would just go rook ac1. Just go rook ac1. And you don't have to be afraid about black taking here on e5. You take back with the pawn, and you can maybe enter on d6. Maybe you can play bishop a3, exchange the bishop. Then there's a beautiful square on d6. Looks great. So knight takes c7, while obviously not blundering anything, it feels like it's just helping the opponent. Now rook ac1. Again, also e4 is an option, but rook ac1 is natural enough. Rook ac8. Now you go for this e4. Very well. Queen b8. And now you play knight e5. But I think it feels more natural to just win more space. Play e5 and then go after the dark squares. Exchange this bishop on e7, which is an important guard of the square on d6. And then you have a beautiful entry square for your knight. So that seems a more forceful way to play. Obviously, a black position is very solid, but also quite passive. And you can potentially increase the pressure on the b and c file. And with a knight on d6, you have a very good chance. So probably black has to go c5 here. And then you could take on c5 and still play knight d6, and it looks uncomfortable for black. Maybe black can save himself, but it looks uncomfortable. By the way, you could also go bishop a3 immediately. That's probably doesn't make a big difference. Probably black has to go c5 as well. All right, let's keep going. Knight e5, rook fd8, queen f3. Yeah, you see here, it's not that easy to continue to play, right? Black's very solid. And how to break through? You play bishop h3 with some interesting ideas here to go with d5, potentially, in some cases. Also some sacrificing ideas. Okay, rook c4, doubling on the c file. Knight d7. Now you play a very interesting idea, which I quite liked, keeping the pressure on. Of course, you could retreat, play knight d3. Again, this theme, keeping pieces on the board, right? But d5 I find very interesting and makes it quite difficult for your opponent to defend. So I think that's a good choice. Knight b6, and now the exchange sacrifice, d takes e6, f6, knight g4, knight takes c4, rook takes c4, and you have a lot of pieces in the attack. Your pawn e6 is powerful, so this is making the black defensive task quite difficult, and he goes astray right away, plays bishop e7, after which black is losing. Now you completely correctly play e5 to be able to swing the rook over and put more pressure on the black king position. Now f5, but here, that was another critical moment. I think if you spend some more time here, you'll immediately find the right blow. You play queen takes f5, but that allows your opponent to bring his piece back into the game with tempo and to untangle himself a little bit and to get counterplay. But if you look at this position, there's just a move that just comes to mind. Knight f6. Just crushing black. Okay, black pretty much has to take. If he goes king h8, you can go rook h4. You have all the pieces in attack. It's not surprising that white is completely winning here. And after takes, yes, e takes f6 wins. Okay, e takes f6 wins, and I mean that's already enough. Even stronger is bishop takes f5. But okay, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter how you win, right? I think e takes f6 plus 5, bishop takes f5 is plus 8. It doesn't matter. So if you look at this position, can't be a surprise that black's just completely busted with the two bishops ready to swing into action, with the rook ready to come into attack, with the black queen on b8 being blocked by the rook on c7. So this is game over. So I don't know exactly what happened at this moment, but maybe you played too quickly. I don't know, maybe you just didn't look at this move. And so that's the takeaway here. That's definitely a takeaway. Just look at your options. And I emphasized that so much in the last stream already, but it comes up again and again and again. It's not like some moves are... The reason why we miss moves is simply because we're not looking for them, right? If you hold on for one moment here and just ask yourself, what other options do I have besides queen takes f5? Then your mind automatically will look at checks. And there are only two checks in the position. It's knight h6 and there's knight f6. And once you have seen this move, of course, you will do some calculation, but very soon also your gut feeling will tell you, your intuition will tell you, this is crushing. It's got to be winning, right? So I think what is so important is to just train your mind to look for alternatives, to be open to look for alternatives and not be just, okay, I see this one move, I win a pawn, and then I stop there, but keep going. And look for other moves. So queen takes, bishop g6, queen f4. Now your opponent could have gathered some really good counterplay, rook d1 check, queen d8, which makes sense, right? Bringing the queen back into a game. But he misses that, plays b5. Now you can cover the first rank. Now rook f8, and now your opponent is provoking you. And now you spot it. Now you spot knight f6, and that's just crushing. Knight f6, very nice. King h8, bishop f5, exchanging the defender. And from here on, you just cruise to victory. The attack just goes through. Bishop f7, black has to take, and it's already down a piece here, so the rest is simple. Just making sure not blundering the rook. And now, okay, it's a matter of taste here. I don't know if I were to play like this, but it doesn't matter, right? You're just converting into a one pawn game, and here your opponent resign. So overall, I think a very beautiful game with the attack crushing through with this very nice exchange sacrifice, but also some nice takeaways here. As you can imagine, the most important, I think, was this knight f6 check earlier, right? You played it later, and that was great, but earlier you had a chance, and I think that was the greatest takeaway from this game. And maybe in general, also you said with the knight c4 move you played too quickly, maybe just keep looking for other moves. What else is in the position? Like I said, if we keep looking, we'll find, right? There's a saying, who searches, how's it going in English? Who searches will find, probably something like that, right? And it's simple. You just look for candidate moves, and that is moves that take something, moves that check, and moves that threaten something, maybe the opponent's queen. So all moves that kind of lead to a forced reaction. If you give a check, your opponent has to react to a check. If you take a piece of his, in most cases, he will need to take back that piece. And if you threaten his queen or a rook, then he has to react to this threat as well. So you look at those moves. Just glance at them. Go over them briefly, scan the position, and maybe some of them will catch your attention, and be guided by your intuition which moves you will analyze longer and on which you will spend more time. And then I think that could already be a big improvement. So Bruno, I hope this game analysis helped, and thank you for sending it in. Alright, let's go to the next game, but before we begin, let's check the chat. And Kevin pointed out the right move there. Again, Kevin, I'm really bummed, to be honest, that I missed your game somehow. I checked the emails beforehand, but I guess you must have sent it to me somewhere else. Yeah, I'm sorry. Stomedy is asking, or somebody is saying, I hope you play Magnus Carlsen in real life one day. Yes, I definitely want to, and I'm confident it will happen at some point. And Tilo is asking, when will I do a Banter Blitz? Tilo, I have good news for you. Next week. Next week, it looks like on Friday at 5 p.m. I will do a Banter Blitz at Chess24. Alright, let's keep going with the games. And the second game we have is a game by King Hunter. And King Hunter, as some of you know, was already featured in the last two games, last two live streams. So let's check out this game. King Hunter with the white piece against passed pawn. Alright, and we see the King's Indian opening. So far so good. This is one of the main lines discussed in many games. So I'm not commenting too much. The first comment I'm going to make will be right here. Here the main move is rook c1, and then there's a whole lot more to this variation. And here, King Hunter, you played c takes d6. But what I learned in general is that unless there's a reason to alleviate the pressure, alleviate the tension, you don't do it. So you're taking on d6, but there's no immediate reason. And why should you keep the tension? Well, if you keep the tension, you have more options. It just gives you more options. Maybe in some case you can play c6. That is a possible move sometimes. So by keeping the tension, you keep more flexibility. So just a minor thing, but I want to point it out. Takes, knight b5, provoking a6 and then going back, which is a usual technique to have this b6 square to enter. And you know, you're playing a great game here. I don't really have to comment much here. You are just not allowing any attack by your opponent. And if you are able in the King's Indian to exchange the light squared bishop of black, then for white it's a positional win almost already. Right? That is the most important minor piece for black in the position. And here white has succeeded to do so, and black has no attack going on whatsoever. So white is doing absolutely fantastic. So this is all going great. Now occupying the c file, and we'll go through this pretty quickly until we reach the critical moments of the game. Now g4, king f2, knight e7, and here the first step in the wrong direction, I would say, going rook c7. Just put the rook on b8. Put the rook as active as possible. Now the pawn on b7 is hanging. So knight g6, let's say. And now just knight b4, and what can black do? Black can't do anything. The rook is stuck to defending the pawn. Black is lacking space, and white can just improve his position. And if black tries anything with h4, you just play h3, nothing is going to happen, absolutely nothing. And then you just improve your position. You can play a4, a5, you can do whatever you want, but just as an idea how to win this, you can go knight c6. And if black takes, then this pawn will queen or rook. The black rook has to sacrifice itself for it. And if black doesn't take the knight, then the knight will come to d8. White will pick up the pawn. I mean, there are many ways for white to play, because black is just completely helpless, completely paralyzed, and can't create any counterplay. So you go rook c7, now knight g6, and here this is really a big mistake now. You exchange the rooks. And why is that a mistake? Well, you're exchanging a very good rook, an active rook, against his passive, poor rook on f7. Right? The rook on f7 wasn't doing anything, just defending, not taking any active role, and you're exchanging your very nice rook on c7 against that poor rook. So always ask yourself, is an exchange a good exchange for me? What am I actually trading? Is my piece better than his piece, or vice versa? So with exchanges, that's just a really critical question. And in that case, if you ask yourself that, then it's very simple. My rook is occupying the c file. My rook is causing trouble. I can attack the pawn b7, and then you won't exchange the rook, right? Alright, rook takes, king takes. Now a lot of your advantage is gone, actually, because, well, you still have a space advantage, but it's not that easy to win now anymore without the beautiful active rook. Now knight c1, heading to a5, h4. But here, check what your opponent is doing for a moment, okay? You played knight b3 now, and you're just ignoring what your opponent is doing. Sometimes you can do it here, though it would have been good to just realize, okay, my opponent wants to go g3 next. Do I want to allow this? I could just go h3 and nothing will happen here. I'll just stop any counterplay right away. Of course, black could take on h3 and move his knight to g3, but then what? Nothing's going to happen there. Knight can stand on g3, and so what? Knight b3, knight a5, you go after the pawn. And if g3 check, on the other hand, you play king e1, and counterplay is over for black on the king side. The only possible counterplay ever black could create is by going knight h7 and knight g5 with the threat of taking on h3 in some positions. Doesn't even work here because the bishop is covering g1. But if you really want to be safe, you could play bishop f1 and also nothing's happening. The knights are just looking super stupid. So some prophylactic thinking, just killing counterplay of black on the king side by playing h3. Because after knight b3 now, g3 check, and now you take on g3, and maybe, I'm not sure what happened there, maybe you only thought about that black will also take back with the h-pawn, then indeed, it's all good. Once again, black really doesn't have any counterplay, but he takes back with the f-pawn, suddenly this knight, which was so terrible on g6, not having any perspective, is coming into a game. So what you want to do here is go back king g1 and not allow this knight coming to f4, which is a great square for a knight. So I'm not sure what you missed there. Maybe just this f takes g3, which is unusual because black is not taking towards the center, which is the rule we learn as we grow up, that you always should take towards the center, and black is not doing that here. But it makes perfect sense for him because he's getting the square on f4, and suddenly you're not having any advantage anymore. Knight d7, bishop e3, knight f4, and now again you need to be aware of what your opponent is up to. You played knight a5, that's possible, but h3 I would be a little concerned of because black is winning a piece here. You can take on f4 because this pawn is queening, and after g takes, black goes g2, and now can take on e2 or play g1 queen. Oh no, can't take on e2 because then you can take back, but can play g1 queen, king takes, and knight takes e2, and you have lost a piece. However, since this one's also and you already have two pawns, probably it's still okay. But why allow this in the first place when you could play something else here, like move the bishop, for example, bishop d1, or in the worst case, take on f4. But that's not really what you want to do here, to be honest. So just bishop d1, and now any of this stuff is not happening. So look out for what your opponent wants to do next. Knight a5, b6, and here now you really do need to take on f4 actually, because after knight c6 this h3 variation is just clearly better for black. So here you need to take on f4 and then move something like knight c6, and that should be a draw. Because now after knight c6, now the same line is just better for black this time, because you're not winning the b7 pawn and you will be fighting for a draw here, and will be a tough fight. So again, like I said, look out for your opponent's ideas. I think you just ignored the king side way too much first allowing him to get his g3 in, then allowing him to get a knight to f4, then allowing him to go h3. But fortunately for you, black missed it, played knight c5. And now you took on c5, that's a good move, but it was a better one. And that's another of my favorite sayings. If you see a better move, look. If you see a good move, look for a better one by Manuel Lasker, the second world champion. And yes, bishop takes c5 is winning a pawn. But what if we can win the pawn better by playing b4 and not giving up our bishop on e3? And that's what you can do with b4 after the knight moves. You can just take on a6. And now this h3 move doesn't work as well, because in this line, in the end, the knight on c5 is also tagged, so you win this knight and you win the pawn piece back, and you'll be up at least one pawn. So another good rule to apply, always check for alternatives. And again, this is a kind of move, right? Attacking an opponent's piece b4. So you have to react to it. Bishop takes, pawn takes. Okay, this is a crucial mistake now, because now it just turns out that your a pawn is going to be unstoppable. So I'm guessing a3 was a mouse slip, or I'm not sure what happened here. But I'm guessing it was a mouse slip. Next move, the pawn goes to a4. And black is not in time to create counterplay. And the pawn will just queen, so your opponent resigned right here. Alright, so what's the takeaway? The first half of the game you played excellent. You just crushed your opponent positionally, entered an endgame where you're just positionally winning with an active rook. But from there on, you made some wrong decisions. First you exchanged the active rook. So we talked about that, and then you didn't pay enough attention to your opponent's plans. I think this is the biggest takeaway of this game. You didn't look at the king side really, just look at your own at the queen side, what you can do, how you can create threats, but didn't really pay attention to what's going on over there on the king side. So this is something I would definitely recommend you to look into: prophylactic thinking. Check what my opponent wants to do next. Just ask yourself the question: if it is my opponent's move right now, what would he play? And if you just periodically ask yourself that during the game, I think it can already make a big difference. Alright, still thanks for obviously sending in the game and supporting me. I appreciate it. And I hope this analysis was helpful. Then let's get to the next game. But before that, I'll check the chat again. Alright, there's a question by Tariq Abu El Combos. How can I send in my games so you analyze them? Well, there are two options and they're both explained in the description. So just check the description. I think it's easiest, and I'm not going to bore all the other people. All right. So okay, all the other discussions are about how I would face against Fischer and Carlsen, so I think we can move on, because, well, that's not that much of an interesting discussion. And we have the game by the Duke of Edinburgh, and he was playing with the black pieces, and he was playing the French. Very nice. And now we have the French exchange variation, knight c3. And here bishop b4, and you write, I encountered an exchange variation for first time. Knight f6 comes to mind, but somehow I like the idea of pinning the knight on c3. Yes, that's possible, but it's actually funny because here in this position, after knight c3, bishop b4, e takes d4, e takes d5 is considered to be a slightly better exchange variation than a normal exchange variation. So this is already telling you that while of course bishop b4 at this point is possible, there are even better moves available. I mean, it doesn't really make a huge difference, but in general, bishop b4, the bishop is best placed on d6 in these lines. And obviously you can't play bishop d6 right now because the d5 pawn is hanging. So what is a very common move here is to just go c6. And now it turns out this knight on c3 is kind of misplaced. It doesn't really have a future route to go to, and it is blocking the c pawn as well. So it is kind of just putting the knight in its place by playing c6 and then going bishop d6 next, and maybe even developing the knight to e7. And here actually it might be interesting to stop bishop f4 by white by going queen c7. Because this is very common. White wants to exchange the light squared, the dark squared bishops, and black wants to do the same thing. So black wants to go knight e7, bishop f5 himself. Of course, this whole variation is not too exciting, but still you can create something. And there's enough potential here. So this is just a minor thing, obviously. Bishop b4, bishop b5 check, but obviously you already know what I'm going to say now. Just play c6. Yes, you can go knight c6, but why not just push the bishop back? This pawn move is helping you, defending a pawn on d5, and after bishop d3, well, now just develop natural knight f6, and you can still come back to d6 maybe later on if it's necessary, because you don't want to take on c3. Always keep your bishop, right? So this pin is not doing too much for you. It's not doing too much because you don't want to take to anyway, and later the bishop will be better placed on d6. Alright, knight c6, bishop f4, knight f6, knight f3, and now knight e4. Going straight for the knight on c3, putting on some pressure, and it works out. Here your opponent goes astray by playing queen e2. White could just castle, and that would be fine for white, because after knight takes c3, for example, white has this very nice move, queen e1 check. The point is, if king moves or bishop in between, then just b takes c3. And if knight e4, then actually white can take the bishop on b4 since this knight is pinned. So here probably bishop takes c3 and then just castling here. I think knight takes c3 once again would run into something like queen e1 check, knight e4, and then possibly knight e5 or knight e2. And like I said, if there's no reason to, then don't give up your bishop. Alright, let's see the game. Queen e2, castle, and now queenside castle. Yeah, white definitely needs to castle here. Kingside, like you're saying yourself, this is a crucial mistake already. And in general, it's true. The white king doesn't feel that safe on the queenside anyway. And now bishop takes c3, pawn takes, knight takes c3 is picking up the exchange array, but I really like what you did here. Like I said earlier, if you see a good move, look for a better one. Knight takes d1 is a good move, but there's something even better, and that's knight b4, and that's what you played, and that is good. Always keeping the eyes open, because now after queen takes c3, there's the fork winning the queen, and white is just in big trouble. Queen d2, knight b takes a2 check, king b2 only move, and now very nice, bring the queen into attack, queen e7. The queen is coming to b4 with devastating effect. And white just can't get rid of these knights in time. Very annoying knights. So queen d3, queen b4 check, king a1, and now queen a5. And that move I found a little bit odd, and then I read your comment about it, and you said that you want to go queen a3, but you thought that white could still go bishop c1. But then afterwards you notice, well, you can just take and it's checkmate, right? So that happens to us sometimes, this kind of chess blindness. Of course, in this case, it didn't really matter because queen a5 wins as well as queen a3. But in other situations, it matters. So what can you do against it? Not much I can advise really besides solving exercises and really train this visualization. That's the only thing you can do, and really getting it into your head how the pieces move and what squares they cover. So that's all I can say about that. Alright, queen a5 is also threatening a deadly discovered check. Queen e3. And now you take on b5, that wins with the knight. Also another option was to go knight c1 check. That would have actually forced a checkmate very quickly because of the king b2, there's queen b4 check. King takes c1 and knight a2 checkmate, and after king a1, well, we're already familiar with this one. It's also checkmate. So that comes back to, I guess, just checking your different moves, cannon moves, checking all the checks. And yes, knight b4 would be another move that you could check, but then maybe you just look at knight c1. First it looks odd, obviously, but there's the point to keep this square on b4 vacant for the queen, and just going through the check variations. Of course, it also depends how much time you have. If there's a blitz game and you don't have that much time left, then knight takes b5, of course, is completely fine. Like I said earlier, with the other game, it doesn't matter if it's +3 or +8 or +15, as long as it's winning. In the end, just mess about the result, right? So that's just a side note here. It might matter in other situations, obviously, if you play one move or over the other. Here it doesn't. Alright, so you're already a piece up, still continuing attack. Queen e7. And now knight b4 check. And here your opponent resigned because the queen will come in and deliver checkmate on c2. Yeah, so that was quite a good game by you, I would say. Not much I could criticize, obviously, as out of the opening you were able to gather a huge advantage already. Just minor things I pointed out in the opening with where the pieces belong, usually bishop on d6, pawn to c6, if white plays with knight c3, because that really takes this knight out of the game. And besides that, I like the attack. Also, like I said, really like this knight b4 move, not taking the exchange. What most players would have done, they see, oh, I can win an exchange, go for it, right? But still keeping an open eye for alternatives, so that's awesome. All right, thanks for sending that in. Hope that analysis was somewhat helpful, even though there was not too much I could go into, but still I hope it was helpful. All right, we have one more game, my friends, before I'll check the chat again. And Kevin is pointing out that knight b4 was also working. Yes, maybe a little bit more complicated still. So let's just show this briefly. It's just all about calculation, really, right? So knight b4, king b2, that's all forced, takes. But here, yeah, no, this is not checkmate, because after a5, the king can still go to a3, and suddenly black is down 2 pieces. So yeah, that doesn't seem quite to work. And probably this is what the Duke looked at, and he wasn't sure about this line, and maybe just didn't look at knight c1 check. I could imagine that, because knight c1 looks odd, right? Knight b4 is more natural, but we want to check all the candidate moves. And checks are always candidate moves, always, because your opponent has to react to them. And Anthony is asking, how often will we be getting status updates on your progress towards your top 100 goal? Well, periodically. I mean, I especially do the updates for my supporters from Patreon. But as of right now, I can say that I'm virtually on 2585. So still 15 points to go to 2600, which will be the first milestone goal on my way, obviously. So that's where I'm standing right now. All right, let's go to the fourth and last game. And we'll send in my song. I hope I'm saying that right. If you're watching right now, I hope you're watching right now. Hope you were able to make it. And let's begin. He was playing with the white pieces. And we see another King's Indian actually. And here you're saying, I don't know openings very much, so I thought about d5, but after knight e5, I thought black was fine. Yeah, knight c6 is a little bit odd. Black plays this too early. And indeed, you could go d5 here. And if knight e5, just take and keep developing. That would be quite possible. It's just another option that you have here. What you did is also fine. It will just transpose to the main line now, e5. Now we have transposed. Usually, black starts with e5 and then goes knight c6. d5, and now knight b4 is quite odd. The knight usually retreats to e7. And here is saying, here I thought about some moves. I thought about attacking the knight with queen b3 or queen a4, but you didn't like a4. So that's a good thought process, that wouldn't really help and the queen would be not in the right place. And then you're saying you thought about a3 and b4, so you can control the c5 square, but then you didn't play it for some reason that you don't know. And I don't know either, because that would be absolutely the way to go. a3, play b4, the knight on a6 looks stupid. You're preparing the standard way to play here, going c5. So this is just a great version for white of the King's Indian. So that's the way to go. You played h3 to stop knight g4, but it's the wrong side of the board to play on anyways. I mean, h3 makes sense to put the bishop in e3 without being harassed with knight g4. But yeah, I mean, this other plan, a3, just play on the queen side, focus on that. Focus on that. Rook e8, again now a3 followed by b4, same story, bishop g5, a5, queen d2. And now your opponent just plays an insane move. I'm not sure what in the world was going on there. Plays bishop takes h3. I have absolutely no clue. So we'll just keep going. I mean, we're analyzing it for you anyway, so we're not worrying about the opponent's moves. Takes, knight a6. Now a3. Well, now it's a different story, right? You can play a3, yes, but you have already, you're up a piece. So you don't need to worry that much about creating play on the queen side right now. A plan that I really like here is bringing the bishop to g2. And of course there are many ways to do it. Maybe you could play rook f1, bishop f1, bishop g2, or you could play knight e1, go bishop f3, bishop g2, bring the knight to d3, where you can also exchange the knight on c5 and just go from there. And just exchange pieces. And you have all the time in the world. You're up a piece, right? There's nothing you need to do right now. So now this a3 plan seems not to be in the right time. Queen d7, king g2, just a minor thing. For me, it feels a little bit more natural to put a king h2, just intuition, gut feeling, just in case. Some lines, maybe a g-file would be relevant. I don't know, just my gut feeling. Okay, king g2, knight c5, and here you're saying you completely missed this possibility of knight b3. And you're saying, I thought I'm a piece up so I can give up my dark square bishop and not worry about the pawn e4. Okay. Still, if you're a piece up, keep your bishops, right? You guys probably already know I'm a huge fan of bishops, and unless there's a reason to give it up, just don't, okay? Just don't. Don't give it up. Just defend the pawn on e4, and you could have defended both threats, pawn on e4 and knight b3 with queen c2, like you're saying yourself, and you're good. You're winning, obviously. You're up a piece. So that's the takeaway here. Don't give up your bishop. Especially also because you'll be weaker on the dark squares. Your opponent will have a bishop, a dark square bishop, and you won't. So it's not necessary to do that. And now, yes, you're missing this knight b3 idea. Still, you could play queen c2 or any other move that defends against this threat. But it was just not on your radar, okay? b4. So I guess what could you do to avoid this in the future? Just ask yourself again what I said earlier. What does my opponent want to do next? Is my opponent threatening anything? That's the first question to address. Is my opponent threatening anything? Do I have to react to this threat? And if there's no threat, then you can think about your own plans and how you're going to improve your position. But if there's a threat, you want to see, okay, can I defend against the threat and at the same time improve my position? Right? So that's my advice I would give here. Just prompt your mind in the right direction with the right questions. Knight b3, queen b2, takes, rook takes. Well, that's very natural. Here though, you could have kept the position close by playing b5. The knight is not going anywhere anyway, and you can take it back next move. And why should you keep the position close? Well, you see, you have two minor pieces. And your opponent has a rook for them. And rooks love open files. If they don't have open files, they don't have anything to do. So by playing b5, you keep the a file closed, and the black rooks won't get into action. So just an interesting alternative here. And also comes back to look for alternatives and don't play anything automatic. That's what I see a lot in players starting out, is that if your opponent takes something, they just take back immediately. And 90% of the time, that's completely correct, and that's what you should do. Your opponent takes one of your pieces, you take back. But sometimes there are intermediate moves or other options, and you want to keep your eyes open for these moves. Rook takes, a takes b4, and now queen takes b4. I understand that you want to keep the a file closed. On the other hand, your pawn structure gets worse. So maybe just take with the a pawn. And keep your pawn structure intact. I think that just feels more natural for me. All right, queen takes b4, b6. And now what you did, I really, really like. I really, really like. Bishop d1, that's perfect. The bishop on e2 is not too active, and you bring it with tempo to better squares. Bishop a4, that's a grandmaster maneuver right there. That's how you do it. You realize, okay, my opponent isn't doing anything. How can I improve my position? Bishop on e2, bring it to c6, so much better. Okay, great. Rook a5. But now, bishop b5, your bishop is perfect on c6. And you're saying, I'm trying to use some light square weakness on queenside to my advantage, but I do not know how. I'm trying to put my knight on c6, but maybe I should have just put on b5. And the opponent's rook's move, I knew that this rook will be really active on c5, but I didn't want to put my knight on b5 because the bishop would be stuck on c6. Okay, so a couple of things here. The rook on c5 is not active. It will be just stuck, right? If black ever goes rook c5, you play bishop b5, this rook will not move again in this game unless it's sacrificing itself. So this is not possible for black. So be sure about what your opponent's options are. Your bishop is perfect on c6, covering a8. This rook is not going anywhere. This bishop is worth more than the rook right now. The rook is pretty much stuck here. And with your plan of bringing the knight to c6, takes a long time, and the question is, how much is it really worth it? The bishop is already perfect on c6. And we see this in a game where you actually managed to bring the knight to c6. Didn't really help you. So you need to ask yourself, where is my opponent going to play? And the only thing your opponent can really do, if he is going to do anything, is he will play with f5. So you want to be ready for that. Okay? And here on the queen side, you're controlling everything. So you want to get ready for black to go f5, and maybe you could think about bringing the king over here. Something like that. Maybe bring the king all the way over here. You have time. Of course, you have to prepare it in some way. Maybe bring the queen back. But keep an eye on this f5 move, because that's really the only way black can create any counterplay. Because like I said, if rook c5, it's a lot of errors here, I notice right now. If rook c5, you just go bishop b5. Done. Okay? So I think some fundamental things here, that you just picked the wrong plans in the future and didn't really have a feeling for danger maybe as well. Because what we'll see here is that you're bringing too many pieces away from your king, and that's really hurting you in the end. Now this plan, it looks great, knight a2, knight b4, knight c6, but the knight on c6, it's not doing too much. It's needed elsewhere. So the bishop was perfect on c6, and here you could just play back, for example, and not the knight. Queen f8, knight b4, bishop h6, queen d3, rook a8. Okay, again, bishop c6. Not letting this rook off the hook, not letting him out from the a file. And then actually bring the knight back. I know that looks very stupid, but the knight was just, it's not doing much on c6. So queen c2. Yeah, also I'm kind of struggling to see what you want to achieve with some of your moves. Like, for example, this move, I'm not sure what you want to do here. Okay, I'm sorry. You're saying, I play queen c2 so I can bring my bishop back to the king side to guard my king. I'm not using my f3 knight at all other than guarding h4 and g5. How can I evaluate the current position? Who's better and why? What kind of plan should I make? Okay, we kind of talked about this already. The bishop is doing a good job here if you put on c6, because it is taking this rook out of the game completely. The rook is not going anywhere. You can play a4, then you don't have to worry about this pawn anymore as well, and just keep the bishop here, because that's a nice trade. The bishop is controlling the rook, and that's, you know, it's fine. And then this knight, you need to bring it back. You need to bring the knight back to defend, and not the bishop. So if you can defend, you should be fine. And probably better. But you need to be ready for this f5 and the counterplay along the f file. With this move queen c2, you see, even if you play bishop a4, you will still need much longer to bring your bishop back. It just takes so much time. Bishop a4, bishop b3, what then? To get it back to e2 takes forever. You had the right plan here, so stick to it. Stick to it. Having the bishop on c6 was the perfect square. At least as long as the rook is on the a file, because then, like I said, it's an exchange. The bishop is taking out the rook out of the game. Alright, f5, knight c6, rook e8. Now you see, you have the knight on the square you want him to, but it's not doing anything. That's the problem. It's just looking pretty, and that's just not enough. And yeah, here also, it just seems you and your opponent are moving back and forth a lot. Not sure exactly what to say here. It seems you're a little bit clueless where to put your pieces. Now I think rook b3 it's a good place to defend a little bit. Do you bring the knight back finally? And I want to get to the next critical moment, which is here. So here you could just take on f5 and if black takes back, it has helped you already, because a lot of the pressure is coming from the f file, since you don't have a defender on g2 anymore covering the knight, so knight is kind of loose. And if the f file is closed, then it's not that bad anymore. You can play bishop e6 here, you can maybe take with the queen on f5, and a lot of pressure has been lifted off your position already, even though it still remains complicated. They went rook a3, rook gd8, bishop e6, and here again, e takes f5. Need to close that f file, because otherwise there will be so much pressure on this knight on f3. Knight c6, bishop f4, again e takes f5, knight b4, bishop c1, some tactics, and here you play rook c3. I think you could have just taken this bishop. F takes e4 and now go bishop g4. And you should be okay. Still remains unclear. Still you have a weak king and weak pawns, but I think that was definitely better than what happened in the game. So it's just a matter of, well, just checking. What is my opponent doing? Is he bluffing or not? And can I just take it and then defend? Rook c3, bishop h6, and now I think it was the last chance to take on f5, to have that f file closed. If black goes e4 now, you can go knight d2, not take on e4 because the rook on c3 would be hanging, but knight d2, and still fighting, and still very much unclear, I think. But now after knight c6, eventually, finally, black takes on e4, what he could have done a number of times beforehand, and rook takes a4. And the rook comes into a game, and your knight is out of the game on c6, and it's just too many pieces attacking you. So now queen g4, you're losing here anyway, but you still want to defend as tedious as possible, and king g2 would have been the most tedious defense, because of the queen g4, e4 is just a double attack, right, on the rook and on the knight, and that's it. So we'll see the last moves quickly, and here you resigned. So you're saying, how can I improve? So there's a lot to take away from this game, obviously. And you see I'm kind of struggling to summarize it all. I think the biggest takeaway is, where is the play going to be? Where do my pieces need to be? Because what went wrong was that you tried so hard to get your knight to c6 and then just didn't do anything there. Instead, being ready, anticipating f5 by black would have completely changed everything. If you just prepare with all you have for f5, because that's the only kind of counterplay that black can create, then you won't have any problems and you probably have very good winning chance. Of course, beforehand, there was this point where you lost the exchange, knight b3. That's a one-time blunder, can happen any time, right? That's something you can work on by doing tactics, doing a lot of exercise. The other thing, what then went wrong, was more of a positional kind of misunderstanding with where the piece need to belong. The bishop was perfect on c6, leaving the rook out of the game. The knight was also doing a good job on c3, because whenever f5 comes, and if black takes on e4, then the knight can take back on e4. And the knight is just perfectly placed on e4. So, I think this is the biggest takeaway. To realize, what is my opponent, where's my opponent going to play, and how can I be ready for that? I mean, again, also later, when you had multiple times a chance to close the f-file, kind of close the f-file by taking on f5, and then not having to deal with the pressure on the f3 knight anymore. that was another kind of pointer. You, I guess, did not really realize how strong the pressure could be on the f-file, and that you don't want to allow that. Okay. So in that regard, I would recommend you to check out Mastering Chess Strategy by Johan Halsten. It's a very good book on playing sound positional chess. Alright, that brings us to the end of the live stream. I'll once again check the chat. TM is asking, do you think you're going to reach the top 100 this year? Good question. Not sure. We'll see. We'll find out. It's possible, but I would need to play some really good tournaments. Tarek is asking if I've ever thought about presenting openings and so on in my videos. Yes, I have, but the thing is that I've published a lot of my openings on Chess24, and so there's a lot of overlap, and maybe I'll do it in the future in some other way, maybe talking about how one builds a repertoire and how to analyze openings, but my specific repertoire, probably I'm not going to do that because it's already on Chess24, so you can check that out there. Sweepy is asking, what do you think about Chess 960? Do you think it's better in the current version, which is ruined with all the theory? Please reply. Enjoy your videos, by the way. Well, thank you, first of all. I don't think the current version of chess is ruined in any way. There's still a lot to discover and a lot to be found, and I like chess how it is. I don't play any other kind of chess variant. I mean, sometimes I play backhouse, but I never really play 960. There's some value to it, but I like chess as it is right now, so no need for me to change it. And Wilbur Hoven is asking, tell us a little bit about the simul, the upcoming. Well, that is the next milestone goal on Patreon. If we reach the next milestone goal, then I'll do a simul against my patrons. I hope I said that correctly this time. And that would be probably on Lichess, because they're having this option where you can do simuls. I've never done it myself, but I know it exists. And yeah, it would be a lot of fun. So hopefully we can do it at some point. All right, last question. What was the last chess book you got and how did you make use of it? I got 3 chess books last from New Chess. And the first one of the 3 I read, which I can highly recommend, is 100 Endgames You Must Know. And I found it really helpful for me to review those endgames. Of course, a lot of them I already knew, but a lot of them it was really nice to have this kind of review. And also for me to have a book I can go to whenever I want to check the Vancouver position, for example, or specific rook endgames, which just happen quite often in the practice, and you want to be sure you get them right. So 100 Endgames You Must Know by Jesus de la Villa. Great book. I can absolutely recommend, because he just looks at the most common ones. And I'm all about efficiency, so I don't want to spend my time on super rare endgames. I want to know those that actually happen in my games. And there's an interesting statistic. He said about 8% of the games end in rook endgames. That's like 1 in 10 almost. So if you think about it, you really want to know your way around in rook endgames, because every 10th game or so, you might have a rook endgame. Alright, that's it for today's live stream. Thanks for tuning in. And just for you guys, For the German viewers who are still here, tomorrow there will be another live stream. I'll do the same thing, well, different games obviously, but with German supporters, I guess, in German. So it will be a game analysis live stream in German, and that will be the first time. And I'll have 4 games to cover just as today, so that will be good. All right, that's all. I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.